My name is Mark Milley, and for 4 years I served as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States. I've commanded troops in combat, advised presidents on matters of war and peace, and stood at the epicenter of America's most critical national security decisions. But nothing in my 40-year military career prepared me for what I'm about to tell you. 3 months ago, I discovered something that shook me to my core, a conspiracy so deep within the Pentagon that it threatened not just my position, but the very foundation of American democracy itself. What started as a routine security briefing would lead me into the darkest corners of military intelligence, where I would uncover a plot that could have changed the course of history. Let me be clear from the start. There came a moment when I had to choose between my oath to the Constitution and loyalty to those who had placed their trust in me. That choice would force me to do something I never imagined, to secretly record conversations with some of the most powerful people in America, knowing that discovery could end my career and possibly my freedom. It was a Tuesday morning in October, when everything changed. I was in my Pentagon office, reviewing the daily intelligence briefings, when my aide knocked on the door with an unusual urgency in his voice. "Sir, we have a situation. There's someone here who says they need to speak with you privately. No appointment, no identification through normal channels. But sir, ... He paused, clearly uncomfortable. They knew details about Operation Blackwater that only 5 people in the entire Pentagon should know. Operation Blackwater was one of our most classified ongoing missions, so classified that even most of my staff didn't have clearance. The fact that a walk-in visitor knew about it immediately set off every alarm bell in my head. "Send them in," I said, my hand instinctively moving to the secure phone that could summon security within seconds. The person who walked through my door was not what I expected. It was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, an intelligence analyst I knew by reputation, but had never met personally. She was known throughout the Pentagon as brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely trustworthy. But the woman standing before me looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually pristine uniform was wrinkled, her hands shook slightly, and her eyes held a fear I had rarely seen in seasoned military officers. "Sir," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to show you something that will change everything. You think you know about the Pentagon's chain of command?" She placed a tablet on my desk and activated a video file. What I saw in the next 10 minutes would haunt me for months to come. The video showed a clandestine meeting in what appeared to be a secure conference room somewhere within the Pentagon. Around the table sat 6 individuals. 3 I recognized immediately as high-ranking Pentagon officials. 2 appeared to be civilian contractors, and 1 whose face was partially obscured, but whose voice I knew all too well. They were discussing something called Protocol 7, a contingency plan I had never heard of, despite being the highest-ranking military officer in the country. As I listened to their conversation, my blood ran cold. "Phase 1 is complete," one of the officials was saying. "We've successfully diverted $2.3 billion from the Special Operations budget without detection. Phase 2 requires the cooperation, willing or otherwise." Another voice chimed in. "Milley's too smart and too clean. He'll never go along with this willingly. We need leverage." That's when the partially obscured figure leaned forward, and I could finally see his face clearly. It was Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Harrison, a man I had worked with for 2 years, a man I considered not just a colleague, but a friend. "Leave Milley to me," Harrison said with a coldness that made my stomach turn. "I have something that will ensure his compliance, and if that doesn't work..." He made a gesture across his throat that needed no interpretation. "Lieutenant Colonel..." Chen paused the video and looked at me with eyes full of terror and determination. "Sir, this was recorded 3 days ago. They're planning to approach you tomorrow with demands that you falsify intelligence reports to Congress. authorize unauthorized weapons transfers to foreign entities, and provide cover for what appears to be the largest military corruption scandal in U.S. history. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, my mind racing through the implications. How did you get this recording? I've been investigating discrepancies in budget allocations for 6 months, she explained. Small things at first, transfers that didn't add up, authorizations that seemed to bypass normal channels. I started following the money trail, and it led me to this group. They call themselves the Guardians. They believe they're protecting America by operating outside constitutional oversight. She pulled up another file on the tablet. Sir, they've been operating for at least 3 years. They've been manipulating defense contracts, redirecting military aid, and even influencing foreign policy decisions without authorization from elected officials. They've essentially created a shadow government within the Pentagon. The weight of what she was telling me began to sink in. Who else knows about this? Asterisk, as of right now. Just you and me, sir. Everyone else who got close to discovering this. She showed me another document, a list of names with dates next to them. Transferred to remote postings, forced into early retirement, or worse. Captain Martinez, who first noticed the budget irregularities, died in a car accident 2 weeks after he started asking questions. Lieutenant Williams, who tried to trace some of the contractors, suffered a nervous breakdown and was medically discharged. I studied the list, recognizing several names, good officers, dedicated patriots, all of whom had mysteriously disappeared from Pentagon assignments over the past year. What do they want from me specifically? According to their communications, they need your signature on authorizations for something called Project Prometheus. I haven't been able to determine exactly what it is, but the budget allocation is enormous, over $50 billion spread across multiple fiscal years. $50 billion. That was more than the entire budget for some military branches. And if I refuse? Chun's expression grew even more grave. They have leverage, sir. They've been collecting compromising information on high-ranking officials for years. And if that doesn't work, she showed me one final document that made my blood freeze. It was a detailed psychological profile of my family members, my wife, my children, even my grandchildren. Their daily routines, their security vulnerabilities, their locations. It was clear what the implications were. They're not just threatening your career, sir. They're threatening everyone you love. The impossible choice that night. I sat in my study at home, staring at a glass of bourbon. I couldn't bring myself to drink. My wife Holly-Ann was asleep upstairs, completely unaware that our lives had just been turned upside down. I had spent 4 decades serving my country, rising through the ranks based on integrity and dedication to the Constitution. Now I was faced with an impossible choice: betray everything I believed in, or watch as the people I loved most paid the price for my principles. The meeting was scheduled for 1400 hours the next day. Harrison had called personally, saying only that there were new developments and ongoing operations that required my immediate attention. His voice had been friendly, professional, the same tone he had always used with me. But now I knew the calculating coldness that lay beneath it. I called Lieutenant Colonel Chen at 0600 hours. I need you to do something that could end both our careers, I told her. Can you get recording equipment that won't be detected by Pentagon security sweeps? Sir, are you sure? If they discover you're recording them, if I don't record them, we'll never be able to prove what they're doing. And if we can't prove it, they'll continue operating until they've completely corrupted everything the Pentagon stands for. She was quiet for a long moment. I can get you something, sir. But you need to understand, this isn't just about ending careers anymore. These people have killed to protect their secret. If they find out you're gathering evidence against them, ... I understand the risks, Colonel, but I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'm beginning to think some of those enemies are sitting in Offices just down the hall from mine. The recording at 13:55 hours. I walked into conference room 3A in the Pentagon's earring, carrying what appeared to be a standard briefing folder. Hidden within the folder was a recording device so sophisticated that it could capture conversations through concrete walls, military technology that, ironically, had been developed by the same Pentagon these conspirators were now corrupting. Harrison was already there, along with 3 other men I recognized as senior Pentagon officials. They greeted me with smiles and handshakes, the same courtesy they had always shown me. But now I could see the calculation in their eyes, the predatory patience of people who believed they held all the cards. "Mark, thank you for coming," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair. "We have some exciting opportunities to discuss ways we can enhance America's global influence while ensuring our military maintains its technological edge." For the next hour, they laid out their proposal with PowerPoint slides and charts that looked impressively official. On the surface, it seemed like a legitimate discussion of military modernization and strategic partnerships. But between the lines, I could see the truth. They wanted me to authorize the transfer of advanced weapons technology to unvetted foreign entities, falsify intelligence reports to justify increased military spending, and provide cover for defense contracts that would funnel billions into their personal accounts. "This is quite a comprehensive plan," I said carefully, knowing that every word was being recorded. "But I noticed some of these authorizations would require congressional oversight. How do you propose we handle that?" Harrison smiled, the kind of smile I had seen on the faces of enemy interrogators, confident, predatory, absolutely certain of victory. "Congressional oversight is unnecessary in this case. We've identified legal loopholes that allow us to operate under executive authority. Your signature alone would be sufficient to authorize these operations. And what guarantee do I have that these operations serve America's interests rather than private ones?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. One of the other officials, a man named General Patterson, whom I had known for 15 years, leaned forward with an expression I had never seen before. "Mark, I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a request for your cooperation. This is notification of your cooperation." Harrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We've taken the liberty of researching some aspects of your career and personal life. Interesting reading." He slid the folder across the table to me. Inside were photographs, financial records, and detailed surveillance reports about my family. There were pictures of my wife at the grocery store, my daughter picking up her children from school, my son at his military posting in Germany. Each photograph was time-stamped and included notes about security vulnerabilities and optimal approaches for contact. "Your granddaughter Emma is particularly beautiful," Harrison said conversationally. 7 years old, attends Riverside Elementary, walks to school every Tuesday and Thursday because her mother has early meetings. Such a trusting child. I'm sure she would go with anyone who claimed to be a friend of Grandpa's." The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. These people were threatening to harm a child to ensure my compliance. But I forced myself to remain calm, knowing that the recording device was capturing every word of their threat. "I need time to review these opportunities," I said, carefully keeping my voice level. "Of course," Harrison replied. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Mark, time is a luxury that sometimes runs out unexpectedly. We'll need your decision by Friday. That's 3 days." As I left the conference room, my hands were shaking with a combination of fury and fear. But I also felt something else, determination. These people had made a fatal mistake. They had threatened my family in front of a recording device that would capture every nuance of their criminal conspiracy. The network unveiled over the next 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Chen and I worked around the clock to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy, using the information from the recording and her previous research. We began to map out a network that went far beyond what either of us had imagined. The Guardians weren't just Pentagon officials. They had tentacles reaching into defense contractors, foreign governments, and even intelligence agencies. They had been operating for nearly a decade, gradually placing their people in key positions throughout the military-industrial complex. "Sir, look at this," Chen said, pointing to a connection diagram we had been building. "Every major defense contract awarded in the past 5 years has gone to companies either owned by or connected to Guardian members. They've been steering hundreds of billions in taxpayer money to themselves. But the financial corruption was only part of it. As we dug deeper, we discovered that they had been manipulating intelligence reports to justify military actions that served their interests, suppressing investigations into their activities, and systematically removing anyone who threatened their operations. They're not just stealing money," I realized. "They're controlling American foreign policy for personal profit." Chen nodded grimly. "And they've been doing it so gradually, so carefully, that no one noticed the pattern until now. The scope of their influence was staggering. They had people in the CIA, the NSA, even the Secret Service. They had been operating as a shadow government, making decisions that should have been made by elected officials, all while enriching themselves beyond imagination." "How do we stop them?" Chen asked. I stared at the evidence we had accumulated. Recordings, financial documents, communication intercepts. It was overwhelming proof of the largest corruption scandal in Pentagon history. But I also knew that many of the people who would normally investigate such matters were either part of the conspiracy or under their influence. "We need to find someone we can trust completely," I said. "Someone who can't be bought, intimidated, or compromised." The final gambit on Friday morning, Harrison called to request my decision. I told him I needed one more meeting to clarify some details. This time, I came prepared with more than just recording equipment. The night before, I had contacted someone I had known for 20 years, FBI Director Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose integrity was beyond question and whose jurisdiction extended far beyond Pentagon politics. I had also reached out to a select group of journalists, whose investigative work I respected, and who had proven they couldn't be silenced by threats or bribes. The plan was simple, but dangerous. I would get Harrison and his co-conspirators too, make explicit threats and demands on record, then simultaneously release the evidence to law enforcement and the media. If everything went according to plan, the story would break before they could retaliate against my family or destroy evidence. If it didn't go according to plan, I would probably be dead within 24 hours. The meeting began the same way as before, professional courtesies and casual conversation. But Harrison seemed more tense this time, more eager to conclude our business. "Have you had time to consider our proposal, Mark?" "I have," I replied, "but I have some concerns about the legal implications of what you're asking me to do." Harrison's expression hardened. "Legal implications? What you're asking me to do is commit treason. You want me to falsify intelligence reports, authorize illegal weapons transfers, and help you steal billions of dollars from the American taxpayers. That's not a legal gray area. That's a federal crime." The room went dead silent. Patterson looked at Harrison with an expression that clearly said, "I told you so." The other officials shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Harrison leaned back and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mark, I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." He reached for his phone and made a call. "Bring her in." 5 minutes later, the conference room door opened, and 2 men in suits escorted in a woman I had never seen before. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, and terrified. "Mark, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Jennifer Santos." Her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Santos, was one of the officers who started asking too many questions about our operation 6 months ago. I remembered Santos, a good officer who had been killed in what was reported as a training accident. Mrs. Santos has been kind enough to help us demonstrate what happens to the families of officers who don't cooperate with our initiatives. Harrison continued, "Tell General Milley what happened to your husband, Mrs. Santos." The woman looked at me with eyes full of terror and grief. They killed him. They made it look like an accident, but they killed him because he found out about the money. They told me if I said anything, they would kill my children too. Harrison nodded approvingly. Mrs. Santos understands the importance of discretion. I hope you do too, Mark. I stared at this broken woman, this widow whose husband had been murdered, for trying to do his job, and I felt something snap inside me. These people weren't just criminals, they were terrorists, using fear and violence to control the very institution sworn to protect America. You're making a mistake, Harrison, I said quietly. Am I? I don't think so. You see, Mark, you have two choices. You can sign these authorizations and continue enjoying your comfortable life and your family's safety. Or you can refuse and join Lieutenant Colonel Santos in whatever afterlife awaits patriots who die for their principles. That's when I played my final card. I reached into my briefing folder and pulled out a small device, the recording equipment that had been capturing every word of this conversation. But more importantly, I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. Gentlemen, this conversation has been broadcast live to FBI Director Sarah Mitchell, who is currently coordinating with federal prosecutors to issue arrest warrants. It has also been transmitted to investigative journalists at The Washington Post, New York Times, and 60 Minutes. By now, this story is already being prepared for publication. The color drained from Harrison's face. You have no idea what you've done. Yes, I do. I've exposed a criminal conspiracy that has been operating at the heart of America's defense establishment. I've documented your threats against military families and your admission to murdering a fellow officer, and I've ensured that the evidence will survive even if you kill me right here and now. Patterson stood up so quickly his chair fell over. We need to abort everything, now. But Harrison wasn't finished. Mark, you've just signed death warrants for everyone you care about. Did you really think we wouldn't have contingencies? I'm counting on it, I replied, because Mrs. Santos here isn't the only widow you've created, and she isn't the only one who's been too terrified to speak out. But now that this is public, now that people know what you've been doing, they're going to find the courage to come forward. Your house of cards is about to collapse. The aftermath, what happened in the next 72 hours, was unlike anything in Pentagon history. Federal agents simultaneously raided offices throughout the building, seizing computers, documents, and financial records. Harrison and 12 other senior officials were arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to treason. The media coverage was relentless. For weeks, headlines detailed the scope of the corruption, the murders that had been covered up, and the billions of dollars that had been stolen from American taxpayers. Mrs. Santos became a symbol of the victims' families, finally able to tell her story without fear. But the personal cost was enormous. My family had to be placed under federal protection for months while the FBI tracked down Guardian operatives, who had been given standing orders to retaliate against anyone who exposed the conspiracy. My wife and children struggled to understand how the life we had built could be shattered so completely by doing the right thing. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, the brave analyst who had first brought this to my attention, was promoted and transferred to a position where she could help rebuild the Pentagon's integrity oversight systems. But she, too, paid a price. Several attempts were made on her life by Guardian operatives who had evaded the initial arrests. Reflections as I write this. 6 months after that first meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Chen, most of the Guardian network has been dismantled. Harrison and his co-conspirators are awaiting trial on charges that will likely result in life sentences. The Pentagon has implemented new oversight procedures designed to prevent such corruption in the future. But I know this isn't the end. Corruption doesn't disappear just because you arrest a few people. It adapts, evolves, finds new ways to infiltrate institutions that should be beyond its reach. There are undoubtedly other networks, other conspiracies, other people willing to betray their oaths for money and power. The question that haunts me is, how many good officers died or had their careers destroyed before we finally uncovered this conspiracy? How many military families suffered in silence, too terrified to speak out against people who held the power of life and death over them? People often ask me if I regret my decision to expose the Guardians. The answer is complicated. Do I regret that my family had to live in fear for months? Do I regret that my own career effectively ended when I became a whistleblower rather than a team player? Do I regret the sleepless nights, the constant looking over my shoulder, the knowledge that there are people in the world who would kill me given the opportunity? Of course I regret those things. But what I don't regret is standing up for the oath I took when I first put on the uniform of the United States Army. I swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined that some of the most dangerous domestic enemies would be wearing the same uniform I wore, sitting in offices just down the hall from mine. The military is built on trust, trust between soldiers, trust between officers and enlisted personnel, trust between the military and the civilian population we serve. The Guardians violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. They turned the institution meant to protect America into a vehicle for personal enrichment and power. But here's what I learned from this experience. There are still good people in the Pentagon, in the military, in the government. Lieutenant Colonel Chen risked everything to expose corruption. FBI Director Mitchell moved heaven and earth to ensure the investigation remained secure and thorough. Countless military families who had been victimized found the courage to come forward. Once they knew they wouldn't face retaliation. The system isn't perfect, but it can still work when good people are willing to take risks to make it work. The ongoing fight, my role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, ended when I chose to become a whistleblower rather than an enabler of corruption. But my fight for military integrity continues in different ways. I testify before Congress about the reforms needed to prevent future Guardian-type conspiracies. I work with watchdog organizations to monitor defense spending and contractor relationships. I speak at military academies about the importance of moral courage in leadership. Most importantly, I try to ensure that the families who were victimized by the Guardians receive the justice and support they deserve. Mrs. Santos and others like her should never have had to suffer in silence while the people who murdered their loved ones walked free. The Pentagon is a safer, more honest institution today than it was a year ago. But vigilance is the price of integrity, just as it is the price of freedom. There will always be people willing to exploit positions of trust for personal gain. Our job is to make sure they never again come as close to succeeding as the Guardians did. When I look back on my 40-year military career, I'm proud of many things: the battles fought, the soldiers led, the policies crafted. But I'm most proud of the decision I made in that conference room when faced with an impossible choice between personal safety and constitutional duty. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign battlefields. They're fought in conference rooms, in congressional hearing rooms, and FBI interrogation chambers. They're fought by people willing to risk everything to preserve the values that make America worth defending. That's a fight worth joining, no matter what the personal cost might be.